Richard Hartford stood silently at the tall window of his mother's bedroom, watching the perfectly trimmed green lawn stretch endlessly toward distant trees, lawns he paid gardeners a fortune to maintain, just like everything else in his life. His suit was flawless, his watch cost more than most people's yearly income, yet in that moment, none of it meant anything. Behind him sat his mother, Dorothy Hartford, slumped in her wheelchair, small and fragile at 83, a pale shadow of the strong woman who once filled her home with warmth, laughter, and the smell of freshly baked pies. Her silver hair, once brushed with pride every morning, now fell loosely around her tired face. Her hands shook constantly, twisted by age and weakness, resting uselessly in her lap. "Mother, you need to eat something," Richard said, trying to keep his voice calm, though frustration and fear pressed tightly in his chest. Dorothy didn't respond. She stared past him, eyes dull and unfocused, as if she were looking through the walls rather than at her own son. In the doorway stood Richard's wife, Vanessa, elegant and distant in her red evening gown, checking her watch with barely hidden impatience. They were already late for another charity gala, another evening of smiles, handshakes, and pretending everything was perfect. "The nurse will be here soon," Vanessa said softly, though her tone carried no warmth. "We really should go." Richard nodded slowly, guilt weighing on him as they turned to leave. They had hired the best doctors, the most experienced nurses, physical therapists who came several times a week, and chefs who prepared special meals designed for Dorothy's health. Yet despite all the money spent, his mother continued to fade, retreating deeper into silence with each passing day. As Richard closed the door behind them, he glanced back one last time. Dorothy hadn't even noticed they were gone. 3 weeks later, desperation finally crushed Richard's pride. The nurses reported that Dorothy was barely eating, barely speaking, spending her days staring at nothing. One doctor whispered about depression. Another mentioned early dementia. For the first time in his life, Richard felt powerless, realizing there were problems his wealth simply couldn't solve. That was the day Maria Rodriguez arrived. She was 48, with gentle eyes and a quiet presence, carrying a worn bag of cleaning supplies as she entered through the service door, hired only as a temporary replacement housekeeper. Unlike everyone else, Maria didn't notice the expensive art or luxury furniture. Her eyes went straight to Dorothy, sitting alone by the garden window. "Good morning," Maria said softly, smiling as if Dorothy mattered. "My name is Maria." Dorothy barely moved, but Maria didn't push. She cleaned quietly, yet every few minutes spoke gently about the weather, the birds, the flowers outside. Dorothy said nothing, but something changed. She stopped staring into emptiness. She was listening. The next day, Maria hummed an old melody as she worked, a simple song from her childhood. Dorothy's head slowly turned. For the first time in weeks, her lips moved. "My mother used to sing that," she whispered. In that moment, something long buried began to wake up. Maria pulled a chair close and sat beside Dorothy, meeting her eyes with patience instead of pity. She asked about the song, and slowly, carefully, Dorothy began to speak, halting words at first, then memories that had been locked away for years. Maria listened without rushing, without checking the time, treating Dorothy not like a patient, but like a person whose life still mattered. When Richard returned home that evening, he froze in the doorway. His mother was talking, really talking, and there was color in her face he hadn't seen in months. Days turned into weeks, and Maria discovered what doctors had missed. Dorothy didn't need more treatment, she needed connection. Maria learned she had once loved gardening, so she wheeled her outside, placing soft flower petals in her trembling hands. She learned Dorothy loved baking, so they measured flour together, laughing at imperfect results. Most importantly, Maria gave her time, real time, sharing stories of her own children and asking Dorothy for advice, honoring her wisdom. Slowly, Dorothy came back to life. Vanessa noticed first. "She's eating," she told Richard in disbelief. "She asked for seconds." The next morning, Richard found his mother sitting upright, hair neatly pinned, listening as Maria read her favorite poetry. When Dorothy looked at him and said, "Richard, come sit with us," something broke open inside him. Over the following weeks, Richard changed too. He stopped managing his mother's care from a distance and started showing up, having coffee with her, listening to her stories, truly being present. Maria was no longer just a housekeeper. She became a friend, a guide, the quiet reminder of what the Hartford family had almost lost. 6 months later, Richard watched through the window as his mother stood in the garden, leaning gently on Maria's arm, breathing in the scent of roses. "I'd forgotten how beautiful life is," Dorothy said softly. That evening, Richard invited Maria to dinner and thanked her, not as an employer, but as a son. Maria only smiled. "Your mother was always there," she said. "She just needed someone to see her." Dorothy reached out, holding both their hands. "Life is still worth living," she whispered. And in that moment, Richard understood that true wealth isn't money. It's time, presence, and kindness. Dorothy didn't heal because of medicine, but because she felt seen. And Maria reminded them all that love doesn't need grand gestures, just a willing heart. If you enjoyed this emotional story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel True Kindness Stories, where we share real stories that prove kindness can change lives. Red Heart.